Where are all the old videos? That's a question I've been seeing a lot lately. The short, unfortunate story is that they won't be back. I want to be as honest and upfront with you guys as possible. The channel's been dealing with a sudden surge of copyright issues, and it has placed me in an incredibly difficult position. I suppose, upon approaching these stories from a business model, I created a generalization based upon a consensus within the horror narration community that explicit communication with authors was not an important aspect of generating these narrations, a mistake I now greatly regret and will never tread towards again. Due to this transpiring situation, I have removed an immense amount of videos from my channel's library, as you all know. Coincidentally, very recently I've completely revamped the manner in which I acquire stories, communicating directly with authors to receive permission for the use of their stories in all future YouTube narrations on this channel. It has become a process that I foresaw as arduous, that in actuality is quite rapid and rewarding, communicating directly with you guys who are excited to hear your experiences narrated. Now, since the removal of nearly 400 videos, my channel has taken a massive hit, going from reaching upwards of 700 to 800 new subscribers every day and viewership in the millions, to less than I was getting in the early stages of my channel. But I take full responsibility for my negligence, and the channel will be better for it. All future narrations will have explicit permission, and thank the Lord baby Jesus, I still have a channel to read to you today. So I have a backup channel that can be found in my featured channels tab bio and on the screen at the end, though there will be no future errors on my end, so feel free to subscribe just as a precaution. Thank you to all of you who submit your stories over at reddit.com or LetsReadOfficial, and those who give permission for their stories gathered elsewhere. Now here is to a better and brighter future. Enjoy. Alright, so a bit of background information. I'm a 15-year-old male, and this happened about 2 years ago. My mother works at a facility that is basically a dry cleaning factory that's like a send-and delivery service for clothing of all kinds. I had been going to this factory for around 5 years since my mom worked hella late hours, around 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., and my dad was working out of town during this time period, and I lived about 30 miles away from my school, so I didn't have any other options. Since I had been coming to my mother's workplace for years, I knew the general layout of the building pretty well, which explains events later into the story. So this was like any other day. I had gotten out of school on a Thursday, and as usual, I was driving over to the plant to hang out for a few hours while my mom worked. Around 6:30 p.m. to 7 p.m., my mom was notified by her manager that she needed to leave the plant to run some kind of business errand of his, I don't know what. So she told me she was going to go run said errand, and that she would be back in around an hour or so. I was kind of annoyed that I would have to spend extra time there, but I didn't really complain. Since it was pretty much closing time, my mother and I were the only people still present at the factory, and with her running this errand for her boss, that left me the factory by myself. My mother allowed me to use her work computer to watch YouTube while she was gone, so that was a plus side to staying at this plant alone. After she had left, I just sat down in her office and chair and messed around on the computer and did homework. Around 45 minutes later, I was wondering where she was, as she had not returned. Man, she's probably chatting with customers, I said to myself, as she is prone to doing so, being the extroverted woman she is. All of a sudden, all the power suddenly shut down, leaving me in darkness in her office. I was startled by this sudden power outage, and I assumed that since the building was old and the electrical wiring was shoddy, fuses had been blown or something like that. So I opened the door of my mom's office and looked out into the factory. Some emergency lights were on, but they barely lit the factory at all, so I was still pretty much in the dark. I took out my phone and turned on my flashlight to search for the fuse box. As I had been going to the factory for 5 years, I knew where the box was and found it relatively quickly. but when I was walking up to the box, I noticed something wasn't right. The fuse box was wide open, and I saw the door swinging ever so slightly. Now, I was a little nervous, but I assumed for some reason that maybe a draft had caused it to open. Don't ask why. So I walked up to the fuse box, and my heart fell out of my bottom as I saw the wires in the fuse box had been cut. Now I was scared and not sure what to do, knowing that I most likely wasn't alone anymore in that factory. I was thinking of my options when I spotted something out of the corner of my eye. I was looking in the direction of the back exit, which was about 10 feet away to the left of the wall with the fuse box, when I noticed that there was a slightly darker shape amidst the dark wall of the factory, about 30 feet to the right of the back exit, and I could see a subtle glint of light from the emergency lights on the figure. I noticed it and was sure that it was a person holding a sharp object. My heart was racing at this point, but I played it off like I hadn't noticed them and casually started walking to the exit. I made it to the exit and began to turn the knob when I heard loud steps approaching. Not running towards me, more like a kind of race walk towards me. I threw the door open and ran out into the outside, where a motion light came on and flooded the area with a white light. I had to act quickly, knowing I didn't have much time before whoever that was came out of the door. So thinking on my feet, I ran to and dove underneath one of the vans used for pickup and delivery for the clothes that the factory owned. I wasn't under the van for more than 4 seconds before the unknown person opened the door and stepped out into the motion light. The van was far enough away from the door so at an angle I could get a look at this intruder. It was what I assumed to be a medium-sized man wearing black pants and a black hoodie. He was also wearing one of those smiling masks from the Purge movie. My suspicions were also confirmed when I saw that he was carrying a large piece of sharp metal in his hand. I tried thinking about my options of survival here, as I'm not very athletic at all, so running was a no-no. I was horrified to see that he had started checking underneath the other vans looking for me, so I didn't have much time to decide my next course of action. The guy was getting closer and closer to my van, and I was sure that I was dead when a miracle happened. I saw my mom pulling into the front of the lot of the factory, and the guy noticed her too, so we ran off into the darkness. I waited another 3 minutes or so before running back into the building via the back exit, and I saw my mom looking for me under one of the emergency lights. I ran to her crying, trying to explain what had happened. I showed her the cut wires of the fuse, and needless to say, the police were called. They took my statement of what happened, but nothing ever came of it. When I first met the bagman, I was 16. I didn't even think he was anything to worry about at the time. He just passed me by while I was biking around in one of my city's forest preserves called Riverside. Riverside was always a place I could go when I was feeling stressed or anxious. So when I passed by this rugged-looking guy in the middle of the woods, I didn't think anything of it. I had other things on my mind, and for all I know, I could have looked pretty rugged myself, being all sweaty and wearing a black hoodie and biking around like a maniac. He and I were similarly dressed. I didn't have long to look at him as I was passing by on my bike pretty quickly, but he was wearing black sweatpants that were ripped in several places along the muddy white shoes and the black hoodie which he wore with the hood down. I could also make out that he was a pretty big guy in all areas. He was fairly wide and was actually pretty tall. His hair was brown and down to his shoulders. I couldn't really make out his face at the time, but little did I know I would see it in a few weeks. When he saw me coming towards him on my bike, he held up his hand all excitedly and waved at me and then began to jog while I got closer. I thought, at the time, that maybe he was out here exercising like me and seeing me made him remember to start running again or something. But as I passed him, he got so close to my bike that he almost bumped into me. I had to swerve a little to the right to try to avoid him, barely missing him. When I passed him, I kind of heard him shout something back at me, but I couldn't really understand what it was because I had my headphones in. I shrugged the situation off as I continued to bike back to my car. It took me a few minutes to get back to the parking lot, and I was pretty exhausted as I loaded my bike into the back of my minivan. Once I closed the truck, I looked around for a moment to see if the guy I had seen earlier was around. I didn't see him, but the only other car that was parked there was directly across from me on the other side of the lot. It was a long white van. Like the stereotypical creeper van. It was dirty and muddy like the man driving it, and the windows were tinted so you couldn't really see inside. Thinking back on this situation now, it could have been totally possible that this bag man followed behind me all the way to the parking lot and had gotten into this creepy van before I could see him and was in there while I was staring at that vehicle. He could have been watching me through those dark windows and I didn't even know. When I pulled out of the parking lot, I made sure that the van stayed in its place as I passed by and drove home. That was my first encounter with the bag man. But obviously that meeting isn't what gave him his name. A little over 3 weeks later after my experience at Riverside, I was home alone and it was approximately 4 p.m. I was watching YouTube on my phone while laying in bed upstairs in my room. My dog was next to me and we were both just chilling until my dad came home from work. While I was up to go to the bathroom, I heard the doorbell ring and then 2 loud bangs on the door. Now, usually when someone pounded on the door like that, it was almost always my mom because she, for some reason, likes to freak out the dog when she gets home, and a few loud bangs on the door would do the job. So, my dog went running out of my room and tore down the steps to get to the front door. I followed behind him, but I didn't really feel like running. When I finally got to the door, I swung it open, expecting to see my mom. It wasn't her. It was the guy from Riverside. He was just standing there with a big black garbage bag in his hand. He was wearing almost the same outfit that he was wearing when I saw him last, except his shoes were all clean now. I looked at his face and saw he had a poorly trimmed beard that covered most of his face. His eyes were a bright blue and they stared down at me. He spoke before I had any chance to say anything. Now, this will be a rough paraphrase of what he said, as I don't exactly remember. "Hi there, young man. Is Melanie around? I'd love to see her." He didn't actually say Melanie, but I want to replace the name because I actually did know who he was asking for and she lived a few houses down. No, I don't know who that is, sorry." I think at this point, I had given him some kind of smile to try to act like I wasn't completely freaked out. You see, I always park my minivan out right in front of my house, so it's always in view whenever I'm home. This means that he probably recognized it, and me. As if on cue, he says, "I think I know you from somewhere, pal." His voice was deep and haunting, and just kind of left me stunned. I stood there and didn't say anything and shrugged my shoulders. That's when he started to shake that bag. I don't really know how else to describe what he was doing. He was just shaking the bag up and down. I never actually saw what was inside it, but it sounded like a whole bunch of metal cookie cutters rattling around. The contents were poking and stretching the bag out in weird angles. He was still staring at me as he shook the bag and inched closer to me. "Are you sure you don't know where Melanie is?" He continued to shake the bag as he got closer and closer until we were nearly touching. My breath was shaky, and I was looking down at the ground like a dog that had just gotten in trouble for peeing on the couch. Then, I snapped and pushed him away from me as hard as I could. His skin was flabby and soft, and his shirt felt greasy. I used all my strength to get him away from me. I didn't look back as I did a 180 and sped back into my house, slamming the door once I was back inside. I could hear him pound his heavy arms against the door and the clamoring of whatever was in that bag. He banged on the door for maybe 30 seconds before he stopped abruptly. I quickly sped towards the window to see if he was still standing there, and as I moved to the side to get a better angle of the doorway, I saw him looking back at me. When we met eyes, he immediately started running back to his van, which was parked across the street. I recognized it as the same one from Riverside. I was disappointed to see that there weren't any front license plate numbers, but as the van started to move and pass my house, I took down the numbers and letters that were on the back of the van. I still have them written down in my phone. Since that incident, I haven't seen the man since. I notified Melanie that some man was asking around for her. She said she had no idea who he might be and that she would tell her parents to look out for anyone that looked like who I had seen, just in case he managed to find her or her house, but it doesn't end there. About a year later, my mom and I were having lunch and she was actually scrolling through Facebook when she came upon a post from a woman who lived in the neighborhood next to ours. The woman wrote that a man driving a white van drove up to her house and knocked on the door, which her young daughter answered. The man had apparently asked her to get in his van because he had the circus in there. Apparently the mom came to the door in time before anything bad happened, but the man was still being creepy. Unfortunately, the woman didn't post a description of the man, but she definitely remembered the white van. Now, I don't know exactly what the circus means, but I am almost positive it's the same man that visited my house, and I am pretty sure he is still out there preying on people, because just yesterday on the local news they interviewed a 9-year-old girl who was approached by a man driving a white van. So please, if you live in the central Illinois area of the US, please look out for anyone or anything matching what I said in my story. This creep is most likely still out there because he keeps coming up on social media and the news. Stay safe, everyone. This happened back in April. I went to the movie theater, alone, for the midnight showing of the new Avengers movie. I usually wait until the lobby is completely empty before I buy myself a snack and a drink. As I was filling up my cup at the soda fountain, a man came up beside me and said, "Are you here for Infinity War?" I politely replied, "Yeah, I've been ready to see it for a while." He just smiled back. He said nothing and just stared at me. He then said with a teeth-showing grin, "Enjoy the movie," and walked away. Okay, that was weird, I said to myself. It was about 2:30 to 3 when I finally got out of the movie theater. I usually go to the restroom until the place empties out. I have severe social anxiety. Now, I always park near the exit of this theater because the parking is terrible. It was completely empty when I started walking to my car. I started hearing a faint whistle in the near distance. This theater is right next to about 8 acres of nothing but trees. That's exactly where the whistling was coming from, and my car was parked right next to it. The whistling grew louder as I got closer to my vehicle. I was on full alert as I got up to my vehicle. Before I could unlock my door, I hear footsteps and the whistling right behind me. I turned around as fast as I could, and there he was. The man who came up to me at the soda fountain was standing inches away from me with the same deranged smile he had earlier. Now, I'm 5'3" and 115 pounds. This man had to be around 6'4" to 6'5" tall and nearly twice my height. He grabbed me by my hair and smacked my head against the driver's side door, and that's all I remember before waking up. When I woke up, I was in the backseat of my car with nothing but a pair of socks on. My vision was blurry, but I could barely see that the man was inside a gas station talking to the cashier. The key was still in the ignition, so I dragged myself to the driver's seat, shifted the vehicle, and got out of there. I must have been driving for about an hour before I realized that it was almost 7 a.m. I went to my mom's house and had a complete mental breakdown, telling her everything. She took me to the hospital because, without even realizing it, I was bleeding from multiple areas. I had gashes all over my abdomen, and my right eye was completely swollen shut. I was admitted. They did a bunch of tests. A couple of police officers came in and talked to me. I gave them a statement and thanked them for trying their best to figure everything out. It is now June, and I have heard nothing. No arrests made, but 2 more girls have been assaulted around that area since, and I hope I never see that man who took away my sanity that night again. For context, in the present I am a 21-year-old male. When this story took place, I was an 18-year-old female. I'm transgender, and this story happened before I began transitioning when I presented as a female. I had this best friend who, for the sake of the story, I shall deem Carly. Carly was a few years older than I was, more outgoing and more interested in drug experimentation than I was. This being the case led to her to meet all sorts of characters, which in turn led us into some very interesting situations, this one being no different, just more dangerous. I received a text from her which read along the lines of, "Hey, my friend invited us to go over, you down?" I had nothing better to do, and she was at the time my best friend. Not thinking twice, I agreed and prepared to be picked up by her. When we were together, we went to her place for our ritual of bong hoots before taking off on our adventure. Her explaining how her friend lives in the next town over, which was a 40-minute drive at least. Once we were satisfied with our high, we set off to this friend's place. I do want to mention that I recognize how dangerous of behavior this was for us to be operating a vehicle under the influence. Looking back at it, it was very irresponsible, and we were putting not only ourselves but everyone on the road at risk with our behavior. The drive to this guy's house was nothing to write home about. When I arrived, I was introduced to who I would call Liam and his friend Daniel. After I was acquainted with Carly's new friends, we set off into their basement to the designated smoke room to hang out. It wasn't a very big room, no bigger than a decently sized ensuite bathroom. It spotted a TV setup, coffee table, and couch. The only other available seating was a bunch of pillows and blankets inside the closet adjacent to the couch. After smoking some more, Carly and I chose to sit inside the closet on top of the cushioning. There wasn't a lot of room, but we didn't mind being pressed together in a small space. I don't remember what the events or conversation was leading up to this moment, but in a split second, the whole vibe changed. Liam leaned over the armrest of the couch so his body faced us. Since we were sitting practically on the floor from our point of view, we were staring up at him. "Do you know that I could jump off this couch and start strangling you right now if I wanted to?" He said this with beady eyes darting from the both of us. This is when my heart started racing and my body froze. Carly was unfazed. She took it as a challenge and laughed in his face. Liam reached behind to grab a long piece of material that I soon identified as a shoelace. "You think this is a joke?" he taunted. "I'll wrap this around your pretty little necks." Again, Carly laughed, oblivious to the seriousness in his demeanor, thinking he was just playing a prank. He looked at me. "Do I scare you?" while cocking his head slightly. I didn't respond. I stared through him while my heart raced. "You know, if I wanted to, I could end you right now. I could do it. If I really wanted to, I could." Then something in him changed. He was back to the pleasant guy he was when I'd first met him. He plopped himself back into his seat and chatted idly with his friend Daniel. I had enough. I wanted to go. I wanted to leave then and there. I texted Carly, who brushed me off and said we should stay a little longer. She was having fun, she said. I excused myself to the bathroom where I began to have a full-blown panic attack. At this point it was 1 a.m. I was somewhere I'd never been before and an hour's drive to my house. I called my friend, who answered promptly. At this point I was trying to hush my hysterical cries on the phone. I relayed the situation to my friend and how this guy I didn't know was threatening us. How I knew he wasn't joking, but how Carly was playing it off as he was. After a few moments, I had calmed down and my friend offered to drive the hour to come get me. I declined as while on the phone with him, Carly texted me saying how she was gathering her stuff and that we would leave. I got off the phone with my friend and calmed myself down further before leaving the upstairs bathroom. Standing in the middle of the dark kitchen was Liam. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard his voice. "Are you okay? You seem upset." I didn't answer. I rushed past him downstairs to collect my things and Carly. We didn't speak about what happened on the way home. I didn't bring it up because we experienced it from two completely different perspectives. I didn't mention it earlier, but Liam was some guy she had met on a dating website, Plenty of Fish. She was infatuated with this guy, so it clouded her judgment of what a piece of work he was. Much later on after this night, Liam was arrested. It was discovered by medical professionals after he was released that he suffered from a plethora of previously undiagnosed mental health issues. Out of respect for his privacy, I won't detail what they were. I will say that they were most definitely the root of his behavior. The last time that I had heard about him, he had been placed on antipsychotic medication. I hope that man continues to get the help he deserves, especially before he harms himself or anyone else, for that matter. At the time of the story, I was around 3 or 4 years old. I'm 18 now. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, and I've always liked to think of myself as a pretty nice person. A little backstory to my situation. I was living with my mom, grandma, and aunt in a duplex located in a fairly large city. Believe it or not, the city that I did happen to live in didn't have a whole lot of creepy people, or my family was just very good at keeping me from that side of the world. My mom had recently gotten out of an abusive relationship with this guy who happened to be my dad, and we were going through a pretty rough patch. A few more months passed and it was Christmas time. On this particular day, my mom and I were at the store buying some groceries. It was a completely normal trip. That was until we got to the end of it. We stood in line to check out, and some lady was on her way in when she noticed me and abruptly approached. She was probably in her late 30s, early 40s, with long brown hair that reached to about the middle of her back. She was a little shorter than my mom. She is 5'10", and was pretty skinny. She smiled, and I assumed it was supposed to be warming, but it was far from it. She said hello in a semi-friendly tone. I smiled back and said hello, trying to be polite. I tried to scoot closer to my mom, but there was a carton between us. This woman then started asking me questions such as, "How old are you? Is that your mom?" Part of me found no harm in answering her questions, and the other part of me was hoping if I gave her what she wanted, she would leave us alone. I told her what she wanted to know, and she continued to get closer and closer with every minute. She then asked me if I had seen Santa yet. My youthful eyes grew wide and my heart raced, excitement getting the better of me. I told her I hadn't and asked where he was. She explained that he was in the back of the store and that she could take me to him. Before she could get another word in, I turned to my mom and asked her loudly if I could go with this person to go see Santa. She looked at me confused and then realized the woman standing there, and you could see her mama bear attitude start to kick in. She smiled, obviously annoyed at this person standing uncomfortably close to her kid. She then started talking directly to the stranger, letting her know that we were going to the mall soon to take pictures with him anyway, and that she appreciates the offer, but it wouldn't be necessary. She quickly paid for our food and started to push the cart out from between me and her. The woman then insisted it was no big deal and that she would bring me back as soon as I got to see him. She then proceeded to grab my arm lightly and tug me in one way. My mom became horrified as she rushed to my side and lifted me into the cart and insisted we didn't need her help. The woman then had the audacity to tell my mom to suit herself in an annoyed tone and turn on a heel out of the store, not shopping at all. She never had a cart or handheld basket. I have since moved from that city and moved out to be on my own and have luckily never seen this woman again, and have been lucky enough not to run into any more situations like this. I think back to this scenario every once in a while and think of what would have happened had I not asked my mom to go with this stranger, or if she had grabbed my arm more forcefully and pulled me away without caring what kind of attention she might get. I'm glad the situation played out how it did, though. I know this is long overdue, and I have never really thought to have a reason to say this until now. But creepy lady in the store, no. I don't want to meet Santa. Before I begin, I'd just like to say that I'm a normal 19-year-old guy with no history of mental illness or drug usage. Those facts will be important later. A few months ago, I had my first real unexplainable experience late at night. I was sleeping in the living room of my grandmother's house due to the lack of bedrooms, and for the most part, the night seemed normal. I just stayed up until about 11 at night and decided I should get to sleep before work in the morning. I woke up at about 3 a.m. or some ungodly hour in the early morning to an eerie feeling that someone may be watching me. Soon after, I heard a kind of gentle scraping. This only became more terrifying because situated behind me was a large glass door out of my line of sight. I didn't move because I almost didn't want to see what was giving me the paranoid feeling, or what could be peering inside at me making that noise. Like a kid hiding under the covers, I just tried to go back to sleep, but feeling so uncomfortably scared I couldn't. It took all of my willpower to try and keep my eyes closed, as I knew if I had opened them, whatever was there would know that I wasn't asleep. Eventually, I couldn't resist looking out the large glass window, so I shifted my body on one side so that I could very narrowly open my eyes to peek at what made that noise outside. Still, it sounded as if though someone was shuffling their feet on the back porch outside the door, but terror set in as I didn't know if the door was actually locked. Slowly, I opened my eyes ever so slightly to see something that I know I wasn't supposed to see. Right outside the door, standing maybe 6 feet tall, was a black figure in a long cloak sort of outfit. It was not human, but it seemed to be human-like. His eyes were so big and black that I was almost stunned. He was raising his hand and scraping what looked like long, thin fingers down the glass, up and down, over and over, so slowly. I was in a state of complete panic. Should I scream? Should I run? Or should I just lay there where I was hoping that this was all some horrible dream? That last thought somehow claimed me a bit. This couldn't be real as I had been asleep, and this seems a very rational explanation. However, my brain began to realize that I was in the exact same room I had fallen asleep in, and there was no way that this was just a dream. My horror returned in waves as I knew that he was still there, and the door may be locked for him to enter as soon as he grabs the door handle. I knew I had to take it upon myself to lock the door, and I had to do it quick because any moment he could get inside. My adrenaline kicked in full force as I threw my covers aside, jumping off the couch and starting a mad dash towards the door. As I got up, it saw me and made a horrible scream. It didn't stop my efforts, and I continued towards the door as fast as I could. I fumbled with the lock and was able to engage it quickly. Slowly, I lifted my gaze from the handle through the door into the face of what had caused me all this terror. It stood there, motionless. Its hands had stopped the constant scraping on the glass. It just stared back at me as I felt helpless and paralyzed. After a moment, it began to walk away from the door into the field behind our house. I watched it go until it was out of sight, never leaving my post at the door. Hours later, I went back to the couch and passed out, still writhed with fear. In the morning, I told no one from fear of them not believing me. I wasn't ready to accept the fact that either I was crazy or I had experienced something that no one would ever believe or understand. A few days later, I had tried my best to push whatever it was out of my mind. I had resumed my normal activities, and as I drove home from my night classes at about 10 p.m., I felt as if though I had finally moved past it. I drove down a long stretch of road only dimly lit by gas stations and truck stops. I noticed a figure in between the illuminated signs and empty buildings. It stood there. It watched my car approach, and it followed my car with its head until I was far down the road and out of sight. It didn't move. It just watched, and it knew that it was me. A few months have passed, and I haven't had any more experiences, but I am always very cautious as it may be watching me again. So my fiance moved in with me at my parents' house about a month ago, and we both noticed some weird things that have been happening primarily to us. I've always had weird things happen to me, especially after we moved 2 years ago, but it all seems to have gotten worse when we moved in. The first thing I've noticed is small injuries on me and him. I've woken up with small cuts on my hand and wrist over the last few weeks, and then suddenly a large scratch down my leg. As for him, he has woken up with a bruise on his forehead that looked almost like a thumbprint. We don't have anything near or in our bed that could cause these minor injuries, and it's just weird. The really scary thing that happened though was that the other night when he was sleeping, he started talking and pointing to something in the corner of my room. I woke up and looked over and saw a dark shadow for a few seconds, and then it was gone. He had been speaking panic gibberish for the entire thing until suddenly he very clearly says, "She's spinning." I was really freaked out by then and asked him to repeat himself. He said, "Yeah, she's over there spinning," and then promptly went back to bed, leaving me alone to panic. Before he moved in, at least 3 people, including myself, have all heard a woman outside my hall to me in my sister's rooms talking and crying. We've heard it all around the same time and the same nights. My mom's boyfriend even asked me who I was talking to that night since he assumed it was one of us. I only mention this because my fiance had talked about a woman spinning in our room. I just don't know what to do. I'm not bothered too much by strange sights and sounds, but when it starts getting slightly physical is when I start to become worried. I've dealt with hauntings most of my life, and a lot of strange occurrences I try to debunk, but I don't have an explanation for these ones. So this happened while I worked at a daycare. I was a full-time 3-year-old teacher. I had 7 kids in the class. They were touch and go with listening and following my directions, but I'm so grateful that on this day they listened. So each room had outside time. There was the blue room, which had 2 teachers. The red room, the room I worked in, had 3. Yellow room had 2 teachers, and green room had 2. When each room went outside, they had another teacher to help with the kids, but I didn't. I was always on my own with my 7 kids. Being outside alone on the playground with 7 stir-crazy 3-year-olds never made me nervous or uneasy, but today, the church that was connected to the daycare was having a garage sale, so the parking lot was full of cars. The playground was about 150 yards away from the church and daycare entrance. The daycare had no way to see the playground since it was behind the building. So we had walkie-talkies, and as you may have guessed, the walkie-talkies didn't always reach the building so clear. Anyway, while we were out playing, a car had entered. I thought nothing of it, but it drove by the playground, which was fenced in and locked. I had the keys, and backed around the lot of cars to the entrance. Without stopping, they drove back around to the playground and slowed, passing by us. I thought it was possibly a parent, but they know to clock their child out at the front desk. They drove around again and this time stopped completely in front of the playground. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see who it was. The kids were oblivious to this, and I started to become uncomfortable. They drove around again, and as they were driving around, I radioed to the office. "Hey, Ashley, there's a maroon SUV driving around the parking lot. They've driven in circles at least 4 times and keep stopping in front of the playground." I waited a while and got back static. By this time, they had driven back around, and a passenger got out and just stood by the SUV. I quickly yelled, "Friends, let's come over here," and ushered them to the furthest corner of the playground. I frantically radioed again, still static. The kids were asking questions. Finally, the driver got out and yelled, "How many kids you got over there? Need any help playing with them?" The driver was dressed in dirty jeans and a torn shirt. The passenger, dressed the same way, stepped closer to the fence. The kids were asking who they were. I told them to stay put. With all my strength, I walked over to them. They smiled slyly, and the driver said, "Well, you're a pretty tall drink of water. There's room for you and the kids in the back of the car." My stomach dropped, and my mouth dried up. Somehow, in the sternest voice I could manage, I looked the driver straight in the eyes and said, "If you touch my kids, I'll kill you." They laughed, but I kept their gaze and said, "Try me." I slowly raised the radio to my mouth. Holding their gaze, I said, "Call 911 right now." To their and my surprise, the director came back. "We're dialing them. What's happening?" Before I could reply back, they ran to their car and peeled out, but not before I got their make, model, and plate number. Immediately after I saw them leave the parking lot, I yelled at my kids to run with me to the entrance. As soon as we had walked through the doors, the director and some staff were waiting for us. I burst into tears and hugged my kids close to me. The cops came and I gave them a statement, but never heard anything from them. I've since then left the daycare, but I will always be grateful that the kids put their listening ears on that day. I moved in with my girlfriend 2 years ago. She is a widower. I am divorced. Her husband passed due to a self-induced insulin coma. Since we dated and after I moved in, she had told me that she hears her name being called when in the bedroom closet. I have seen a shadowy figure walk across the living room. I asked if it was her, since I was at the kitchen table and she was doing crunches in the living room. I couldn't see her until she stood up and said she hadn't walked across the room. The worst thing that happened so far was early on a Saturday morning. I had set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. Just before the alarm went off, I woke up suddenly and my girlfriend was not in bed and the shower was running. As soon as I realized where she was, the bathroom mirror hit the floor. That mirror was framed like a picture and hung on a wire like a picture. I ran into the bathroom and she was looking out of the shower. She was clearly not fully awake and looked very confused. She said a voice told her to get in the shower and she doesn't remember anything until the mirror crashed. The mirror didn't land face down or disturb the bottles on the counter. The way the hook tore out of the wall was up, like it had been grabbed and yanked. The mirror was laying glass side up halfway between the sink basin and the shower. There was either a real or imagined presence in the bathroom and closet area of the house. Since she works from home, she is reported hearing things and sometimes seeing a figure at different places around the house. This happened to me the first time about 4 years ago and has since happened 2 other times. I think about it often, so I decided maybe by talking about it here I can let it out of my mind. Near where I live in California, there's a woodsy road that runs parallel to the freeway, and it's normally less crowded, so it's been my choice of road for this direction for years. One night I was leaving work pretty late and took that road home like I normally do every day. This was the latest I'd ever been on this road, around 1 a.m. I was driving like normal with all the windows down on this warm summer night with my music up pretty loud, just decompressing from the day. Towards the end of the road, there's a memorial for a couple who had died on that road, and it's been years, so I'm used to seeing it. This night, I passed it like any other time, but this time, everything got slow. Like it wasn't in real time anymore. I don't even remember hearing my music anymore, even though the volume hadn't changed. I focused on the road in front of me and I could see a cloudy mist, like low fog, and as I drove through it, I felt like electricity was going through all my body, like my teeth had electrical currents going through them. As soon as I passed through it, everything went back into real time again, and I felt a wave of horrible sadness and fear come over me, like my own emotions weren't my own. This whole experience lasted probably 2 minutes, but it felt like 20. I kept driving. I wanted to pull over and collect myself, but I also wanted to get off that road. As soon as the road had ended onto the main boulevard, I felt so much better, but incredibly creeped out by what had just happened. I stopped taking that road until about a year later. I had forgotten the whole thing by this time and ended up on that road again with my mom after leaving a late dinner, and it happened again. This time she felt it too, and I felt it again. The memories my experience flashed back to me as soon as I had saw that low fog again up ahead. That horrible, sad, and electrical feeling surged through my body again. My mom said she felt the same thing. My feeling is that the couple who died on that road are not at rest and seem to stay near their crash site, or maybe it's residual energy from the impact of the crash. I've been wanting to go back to that area now that it's summertime again. It's only ever happened to me during summer, but I'm afraid to since it's a full-body experience that makes me really tired afterwards. Has anyone else ever had an experience like this? Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, /letsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel, and grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, for sticking with me through thick and thin, and I'll see you again soon.